There is a piece of underwater footage from Lake Tahoe that the public has never been allowed to see. It was filmed in 1991, more than 1,600 feet beneath the surface, during a real expedition searching for a famous lost wreck.
Slowly, we descended away from the bottom of our boat toward what we hoped would be the wreck of the steamer Tahoe. There, just ahead, we saw her ominous shadow.
The camera found the ship. Then it found something else resting on the lake floor right beside it. The operators watching the feed went silent within seconds. One of them ordered the recording cut, and whatever appeared in those final frames was disturbing enough that the full footage was never released. This is what happened. The expedition. It is March 3rd, 1991. Underwater explorer Chris Nicholson and his team are on Lake Tahoe, on the border of California and Nevada, searching for one specific wreck. They picked March on purpose. The cold months mean less sediment churning in the water column, and at this depth, clarity is the only friend they have. But clarity does not mean comfort. Freezing winds roll across the lake every morning. Equipment ices over between dives. Crew members spend hours hunched over sonar systems and remotely operated vehicles, working in conditions that push both the gear and the men operating it to their limits. For Nicholson, this is the dive that has been building for years. The kind of expedition you do not just stumble into. He has spent months studying old route maps, period photographs, eyewitness accounts of where the ship was last seen before it went down. He has worked the depth charts. He has narrowed the search zone as tight as the data will allow. And he has assembled a crew that knows exactly how brutal Tahoe gets once the equipment passes a few hundred feet below the surface. Everyone on the boat that morning understands what is at stake. If this dive fails, the wreck stays lost. Possibly for another decade. Possibly forever. The wreck they are after is famous, the SS Tahoe. Known for decades as the Queen of the Lake. Long before highways wrapped around the shoreline and tourists filled the casinos, the SS Tahoe carried passengers and freight across the water, at speeds considered remarkable for its era. The ship was nearly 190 feet long, fast for its time, elegant, famous throughout the entire region. For decades, it was the most recognizable vessel on the water. Newspapers wrote about it, families planned summer trips around it. Photographs of the ship cutting across Tahoe in full steam are still circulated today by historians who study the early commercial era of the lake. For an entire generation, the SS Tahoe was Lake Tahoe. But progress moved on. Roads improved. Cars replaced steam travel. The ship became obsolete. And in 1940, instead of being dismantled or sold off for parts, the SS Tahoe was deliberately sunk in deep water and quietly forgotten. Out of sight, out of mind, off the surface and into the cold. Some accounts describe the sinking as ceremonial. Others describe it as practical, a way to put the ship somewhere nobody would have to think about it again. Either way, the vessel that had once defined the lake disappeared beneath the surface in a single afternoon and was not seen again for over half a century. Over the years that followed, the wreck became something close to a legend. Nobody knew exactly where it rested. Some believed the ship had broken apart on the way down and scattered across the lake floor. Others claimed it sat upright in the darkness, perfectly preserved, untouched by time. Expedition after expedition launched. Most of them failed. Tahoe does not give up its secrets easily, and the deep basin is enormous compared to the equipment most teams had access to. But Nicholson has better gear, better sonar, a better team. And on the morning of March 3rd, the satellite telemetry is set, the sonar is lowered overboard, and the lake starts answering back. The first wreck. At first, the sonar reveals smaller anomalies scattered across the basin floor. Dark shapes, metal signatures, fragments of debris. Nothing matching the dimensions of the SS Tahoe yet, but enough to confirm that the lake bed holds more than anyone on the surface ever realized. The ROV goes down to investigate. The tether unspools into black water, and almost immediately, something massive appears on the camera feed. A structure, long, angular, partially buried beneath sediment. For a few seconds, the crew genuinely believes they have found it. Voices rise inside the control room. Equipment is adjusted. Cameras reposition. Then the ROV moves closer. The angle changes, and Nicholson realizes the object is not the SS Tahoe at all. it is another wreck entirely, an uncharted tugboat resting silently in the deep, a vessel nobody on the team knew about, a ship that simply vanished at some point in the past and was never recovered, which raises a question nobody wants to say out loud. If an entire tugboat could disappear beneath Tahoe unnoticed for decades, what else is down there waiting to be found? If an entire tugboat could vanish down there unnoticed for decades, you'll want to be here for what comes next. Hit subscribe before we go deeper, because the second signal is what changes everything. The second signal? Hours pass, the crew works in shifts, coffee goes cold, eyes burn from staring at monitors. The cold seeps through every layer of clothing the men on deck are wearing. Outside the control area, the lake is the kind of still that feels wrong, the kind that makes experienced boat crews lower their voices without realizing it. And then, deep into the search, another signal appears on the sonar. This one is different, stronger, larger, cleaner. The dimensions match the SS Tahoe almost perfectly. The length matches, the shape matches, everything lines up. The ROV is redirected. Inside the control room, almost nobody is speaking anymore. All eyes are fixed on the screens. The tether keeps unspooling into black water as the vehicle drops deeper than it has gone all day. The depth readout keeps climbing. The temperature readout keeps falling. At first, the monitors show only drifting particles, tiny white flecks moving through darkness like underwater snow. Then something begins to emerge. The bow, the railing, sections of the hull, the SS Tahoe is found. And the condition of the wreck is almost impossible to believe. After more than 50 years underwater, parts of the vessel look nearly untouched, windows still visible, deck structures still standing. The ship sits upright in the darkness as if it has simply been abandoned the day before, waiting for someone to come back for it. The metal still has visible markings. The wood that survived the sinking is still recognizably wood. The way the ship rests on the basin floor suggests it went down evenly, settled cleanly, and has been waiting in that exact position ever since. For Nicholson and his team, this should be the high point of the entire expedition. The kind of discovery that ends careers on a triumphant note. The find that justifies years of preparation and weeks of freezing work on the water. The vessel that had haunted Tahoe historians for 50 years. Located, documented, intact. That is the exact moment the atmosphere inside the control room changes. The shape beyond the wreck. The cameras drift slightly past the visible side of the SS Tahoe, sweeping across the lake floor for context shots. And someone notices something that is not supposed to be there. At first, the operators assume it is debris, a pale shape resting near the sediment, some piece of the ship that broke loose at some point and settled nearby. Nothing unusual, nothing worth pausing the dive for. But the closer the ROV moves, the less sense the object makes. The shape is too symmetrical, too smooth, too deliberate. It does not look like wreckage. It does not look like a natural formation. It looks like something that was placed there, or something that ended up there on its own. Then another shape appears behind the first, darker, slightly different, and then another behind that one. Three distinct forms, arranged in a way that does not match anything the crew expected to see. The ROV moves in another few feet. The lights catch a detail that should not be there, then another. The kind of details that the brain registers a full second before the mouth can form words about them. Inside the control room, somebody exhales sharply. Somebody else stops typing. The hum of the equipment is suddenly the loudest thing in the room. One of the operators asks for the vehicle to stop moving. Another leans closer to the monitor, studies the frame for a long moment, and says quietly that he thinks they are looking at remains. Human remains. The camera feed becomes unstable for a few seconds. Sediment drifts through the frame. The ROV's thrusters disturb the bottom and cloud the picture. Then the lights shift slightly across the lake floor, and whatever becomes visible in those next seconds reportedly makes the entire room go silent. One person stops speaking mid-sentence. Another says only 4 words. Pull it back, now. Not bones. Here is what you have to understand about Lake Tahoe to grasp why those 4 words matter so much. Tahoe sits over 6,200 feet above sea level. At its deepest point, it drops more than 1,600 feet straight down, deeper than 4 football fields stacked vertically. The water near the bottom hovers just above freezing year-round. Almost no light reaches the basin floor. Pressure increases, oxygen levels drop, And because of those exact conditions, things down there do not decay the way they would almost anywhere else on Earth. When most people imagine human remains underwater, they imagine bones, skeletons, the kind of imagery you see in pirate movies and ocean documentaries. That is not what cold, deep water actually does to a body. In freezing oxygen-depleted water at extreme depth, a body does not decompose normally. The bacteria that drive decay slow down dramatically. Fat tissue can transform into a waxy substance that resists breakdown for decades. Clothing can survive almost intact. Hair can remain visible. Facial features can stay recognizable for years longer than anyone would expect. That is not what cold, deep water actually does to a body. In freezing oxygen-depleted water at extreme depth, a body does not decompose normally. The bacteria that drive decay slow down dramatically. Fat tissue can transform into a waxy substance that resists breakdown for decades. Clothing can survive almost intact. Hair can remain visible. Facial features can stay recognizable for years longer than anyone would expect. Forensic researchers have documented this for decades. Bodies pulled from glacial lakes, deep alpine reservoirs, and northern fjords have shown levels of preservation that genuinely shocked the recovery teams. Faces still identifiable, clothing still intact, personal items still attached. In some documented Alaskan and Scandinavian cases, the deceased looked closer to sleeping than to having spent 30 or 40 years underwater. The recovery teams who pulled them out reported having to brace themselves before the bodies broke the surface, because the brain expects bones at that timeline, and what it gets instead is something the eye refuses to accept at first glance. Now apply that science to a lake at 6,200 feet of altitude with 1,600 feet of freezing oxygen-starved water sitting on the basin floor. If a place on Earth was specifically designed to preserve whatever ended up inside it, the deep basin of Lake Tahoe would be near the top of the list. So, when those operators allegedly looked at their monitors in 1991 and went silent, they were not staring at old scattered bones. They were staring at something that still looked like what it had been when it first went down. The footage that never made it out. This is the part of the story where verified history and unverified claims split apart, and it matters which one you are looking at. Here is what is verified. The expedition was real. Chris Nicholson led it. The dive happened on March 3, 1991. The SS Tahoe was located and documented. The uncharted tugboat was discovered. The dive logs and the photographic record of the wreck exist. Here is what is alleged, and only alleged, by someone who later claimed to have worked alongside the team. That a second recording captured something else near the SS Tahoe. That the operators ordered the feed cut before the camera could finish documenting what was on the lake floor. That experienced underwater operators, men who had spent years looking at wrecks, bodies, debris fields, and the worst the deep could offer, wanted nothing more to do with what they had just seen. They allegedly did not want to review the footage. They did not want to send the ROV back. They did not want to discuss it later. They just wanted to leave. Officially, none of that has ever been acknowledged. The team confirmed the SS Tahoe. They confirmed the tugboat. They confirmed the dive conditions. But the rest of it, the shapes near the wreck, the order to cut the feed, the silence in the control room, lives entirely in the version of the story passed along years later by someone who claimed to have been there. According to that version, the hours after the recording cut were the strangest part. The mission had technically just succeeded. The SS Tahoe had been found. The discovery would put names in dive journals and articles for years. By any normal measure, the boat should have been celebrating. Instead, the boat was quiet. The crew did the work of packing equipment without the conversation that usually fills that work. Nobody asked to review the last segment of footage. Nobody volunteered to send the ROV back for a closer look at what was down there. The decision to leave was made fast, with very little discussion, and once it was made, nobody pushed back on it. And yet, the story sticks. It sticks because there is just enough verifiable reality underneath it to make it impossible to dismiss outright. The older stories. Lake Tahoe already had a quiet reputation long before 1991. The kind of reputation locals know about, but tourists never hear. People vanish around Tahoe every year. Boating accidents happen. Vehicles slide off icy roads and disappear into deep water. Storms appear without warning and overturn small craft. Some of those losses are documented, many are not. The lake is enormous, search teams have limits, bodies are not always recovered. Then there are the older stories, the ones long-term residents repeat quietly and rarely write down. Rumors going back to the casino era of the 1950s and 1960s, when organized crime ran significant operations on the Nevada side of the lake. Stories about people who crossed the wrong figures and were never seen again. Stories about bodies dumped into deep water where nobody would ever find them, weighted down and forgotten, hidden under more than 1,000 feet of cold black water. There are quieter possibilities too. People who walked into the lake on purpose and were never recovered. Hikers and climbers who fell from the cliffs along certain stretches of the shoreline and went straight into deep water with nobody close enough to see it happen. Small private planes that vanished in winter weather and were assumed to have crashed in the mountains when they may have actually gone into the lake. Cars that slid off the road during blizzards and were never reported missing because nobody saw them go in. Tahoe sits between two states, surrounded by remote terrain, and the lake has been quietly collecting things that fell into it for over a century. Search and recovery teams who have worked the lake will tell you the same thing if you ask them privately. The official missing persons numbers around Tahoe do not match the lived experience of the people who actually search the water. There are recoveries that take years. There are recoveries that never happen. There are reports that go cold because the depth makes the search functionally impossible after a certain window of time has passed. And there are people who locals knew personally, who went out on the lake one afternoon and simply never came back with no wreckage, no body, and no explanation that ever satisfied the families left behind. The lake does not erase what it swallows, it keeps it. Which means if even a fraction of those older rumors are true, there is no telling who or what is still sitting at the bottom of Tahoe right now, looking almost exactly the way they did the day they went in. The unmapped deep. Most people assume modern technology has mapped every inch of every lake in America by now. That is not true, especially not for Tahoe. At depths exceeding 1,500 feet, normal recreational diving is impossible. Even technical divers can only descend so far before the math stops being survivable. Almost everything below that range depends on sonar, ROVs, specialized equipment, and substantial funding. Most expeditions cover small, focused areas, not the entire basin, which means even today, vast sections of the Tahoe lake floor remain barely explored. Every few years, a new sonar survey turns up something the previous surveys missed. A piece of equipment from the early industrial era, a boat that was reported lost decades ago and assumed to be on a completely different part of the lake, construction debris dumped during shoreline development that nobody bothered to log. The basin keeps producing new entries on the list of what is down there, and every entry comes with the same realization. If this could sit unnoticed for that long, what else is waiting? The divers who have gone down deep describe the experience in ways that are hard to forget. One former Tahoe diver described his descents as psychologically disturbing in a way no other lake had ever been. He said the darkness felt endless. The beam from his flashlight disappeared into blackness before it ever reached the bottom. The cold was so penetrating that thinking clearly became difficult, and every so often, objects would emerge from the dark with almost no warning. A wheel, a doorway, a piece of railing, a shape that turned out to be a sunken boat nobody knew was there. He described the moment of recognition as the worst part. The instant your brain registered what you were looking at, the realization landed all at once. You were staring at something that had not seen daylight in decades, sitting exactly where it had landed, frozen in the kind of preservation that most of the world never gets to see. He also said something that other deep-water divers have echoed in their own words. The bottom of Tahoe does not feel empty. It feels occupied. Whether that feeling is a real read on the environment or just a trick your mind plays when the cold and the darkness press in from every direction, it is the same feeling almost every diver reports once they have been deep enough to know. Multiply that experience across more than 1,600 feet of basin floor. Then ask yourself how much of what is down there has actually been seen. Why the story will not die. Deep water affects the human brain differently than almost any other environment. Astronauts who train underwater have described the experience as psychologically more intense than space itself. You lose orientation, you lose sound, you lose any real sense of scale. At extreme depths, the mind starts filling in the gaps the senses cannot. darkness becomes shapes, shapes become possibilities. And when an ROV camera reveals something ambiguous at the bottom of a lake over 1,600 feet deep, viewers naturally project their worst interpretations onto the image. The brain hates uncertainty. When the picture is unclear, imagination fills the gap. And imagination is almost always worse than what was actually there. That is exactly what happened with the alleged Tahoe footage over the years. Screenshots spread across forums. Heavily edited versions appeared on conspiracy channels. Fake audio was added by people trying to hype the legend. Some viewers zoomed into grainy frames and insisted they could see human features. Others argued the footage showed nothing more than wreckage and sediment. But regardless of what was actually visible, the mystery itself became the story. It also became one of those stories that refuses to fade. Every time it seems to die down for a few years, somebody surfaces it again. A documentary touches on it. A diver mentions it on a podcast. A new generation of viewers discovers the footage online and reacts the same way every previous generation did. Unsure of what they're looking at, unable to look away from it. And once a mystery reaches the internet, it almost never disappears, especially when the foundation underneath it is real. The expedition happened, the wreck was found, the dive logs exist. That partial truth is exactly what makes the rest of the legend so difficult to kill. Even today, Tahoe is one of the most studied lakes in America. Researchers monitor water clarity, pollution, invasive species, environmental change. ROV systems are dramatically more advanced than the equipment used in 1991. Cameras now capture detail older expeditions could only dream about. And yet, new wrecks continue being discovered. Unexpected debris still appears on sonar scans. Every few years, another strange underwater story surfaces online and reignites public fascination with the lake. Some of those stories have normal explanations. Most probably do. But Tahoe is beautiful on the surface and brutally cold underneath. And sometimes the clearest water hides the darkest things. So, the next time you see a postcard photograph of Lake Tahoe reflecting the Sierra Nevada beneath a perfect blue sky, remember something simple. That photograph captures only the surface. Beneath it lies more than 1,600 feet of freezing black water, sunken vessels, forgotten objects, decades of history. And maybe, somewhere in an archive on an aging tape or a forgotten storage drive, a recording from the bottom of Tahoe that experienced operators decided the public should never fully watch. Not because what appeared on camera was impossible, but because it was entirely, horrifyingly possible. And whatever emerged in those final frames was enough to make them cut the recording immediately and never speak about it again. The question that will not go away. So here is the question we're thinking about before this story leaves your mind. If you had been sitting inside that control room on March 3rd, 1991, watching those shapes emerge from the darkness beneath the SS Tahoe, would you have kept recording? Would you have pushed the ROV closer for a clearer image? Would you have demanded answers, even knowing what the cold water down there can preserve? Or would you have done exactly what they allegedly did, pulled the camera back, shut the feed down, and left whatever was sitting on the bottom of that lake exactly where it had been waiting, undisturbed, for who knows how long? Some people believe the deepest parts of Lake Tahoe are nothing more than underwater history, old wrecks, old debris, old stories blown out of proportion by the internet. Others believe the lake is still hiding things, real things, the kind of things that experienced operators in 1991 looked at once, decided nobody else needed to see, and walked away from forever. Subscribe. We dig into a case like this every single week, and the next one might be the one you remember years from now. Then tell me in the comments, would you have kept recording? I read every single answer.